Assassin's Creed Syndicate is a really weird game to talk about, and I said the same thing about Unity in my last video, but Assassin's Creed Syndicate is weird for different reasons. If I look at all the pieces of Assassin's Creed Syndicate, it doesn't do anything better than good. It has good combat, but it's not great. It has decent parkour, but it's not great. Nothing about it is great. But I can't lie. Every time I picked up the controller and played this game, I had a ton of fun. So I guess you could say as a whole package, it's just a fun game. And this is a complete contrast to the previous game, Unity, where they seemed like they tried to take a really big swing and do something exciting with the franchise. This game feels like they came into the studio and said, let's make a middle-of-the-road video game that some people will have a lot of fun with and some people just won't care about. And honestly, I think that worked to its benefit. To kind of back this thought up, let's look and see where Assassin's Creed was as a series at the time. People were finally starting to feel that yearly fatigue that we were having, and a lot of that goes into the fact that Ubisoft was kind of at its peak too, but it was releasing games that all felt very similar with things like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Watch Dogs. And while yes, all these games played a little differently here and there, they all had a similar loop with open worlds that you climb a tower, you unlock a bunch of areas, you go fight in some enemy territories to conquer them, and so on and so forth. And on top of that, a lot of the writing and the tone of all these games were similar because, well, they were coming from the same company. So people started to feel a little jaded and burnt out by this loop. Mix that with the fact that the previous title, Assassin's Creed Unity, had a devastating, disastrous launch that was just plagued with bugs and just wasn't up to snuff. That led to Assassin's Creed Syndicate coming out to a less than stellar reception. A lot of people didn't care, and on a personal note, I know a lot of friends who didn't play this game until years later. Still to this day, I believe this is the second worst selling Assassin's Creed, maybe only behind Rogue, and that game didn't do well because they basically just come out and said, hey, this is the less important Assassin's Creed next to Unity, which of course is an awful marketing idea. But it also came out a few months after Arkham Knight, which when you compare those two, Arkham Knight is objectively better. It has a prettier open world, better combat, and things like that. And so when I think back about this game, I don't have a lot of memories on it. I remember liking it, but I don't really know why. I just remember really digging the concept because I love movies and TV shows that are period pieces revolving gangs. For example, Gangs of New York, the TV show Gangs of London, the TV show Warrior, and things like that. I'm also a big fan of the whole steampunk industrial revolution era. I think visually it's just really cool. I enjoy all the harsh steelwork and the way that looks just set in a city. And so I think those low expectations dramatically helped this game. And if I'm being honest and objective, I think this game only gets to about a 7 out of 10, which is the same score I would have probably given Unity, but just for completely different reasons. Look, a good way to sum this up is Assassin's Creed Syndicate is kind of like the Taco Bell or McDonald's of video games. If you like those things, then you really do like them, but they're objectively not the best thing you could eat. And to give more specific examples of why, I think the game feels pretty low stakes. It just feels arcadey and fun in a lot of ways. The story isn't memorable, but I did find it super fun and I enjoyed hanging out with Evie and Jacob. And it also didn't feel incredibly long. I feel like I got through it in a moderately reasonable time. It's kind of like the random Netflix movie that you don't know much about, you flip on a Saturday afternoon, and you enjoy the time you had with it, but you don't think about it that much afterwards. And yes, you could definitely argue that the game not being memorable is a problem, and I can understand if that's the issue you have. But for me, I just thought it was a fun playthrough of a video game. Now, I will say as far as the technical side of the game, I think this and Assassin's Creed 4 are the only games that haven't been current gen upgraded by the Xbox Series X, and so yes, it does run at a painful 30 frames a second that after a couple hours you kind of get used to. So it's not the biggest deal, but it can be a little bit ugly at times because of that. But with that being said, I do kind of love the way that character models and buildings and things look in this game. The art style, I think, carries it in a really unique way. It's pretty much a carryover from Unity, which also had fantastic character models and fabric textures and things like that. You can especially see it when there's a good lighting. But enough about technical stuff, let's talk about the gameplay that I think is just absolutely fun as hell. And I think a lot of the reasons it's fun is because it's extremely streamlined. The game isn't super difficult. Like, yeah, you're gonna get hit here and there, but very rarely am I dying. It feels like a pretty straightforward action game, but objectively, the combat isn't like amazing. It's kind of a shittier version of Arkham style combat, and I say that as someone who is a huge fan of the Arkham games and can dissect those deeply. But with that being said, Syndicate still is a lot of fun. The combat is weird though, because it just kind of feels like they decided to speed up the animations by 50%. Almost like when they were playtesting it, they felt it was too slow, so let's just make everything move a little bit faster. That creates a weird sense of flow at times where it's difficult to read when you should counter as you're just watching and waiting for their health bar to flash gold. So you kind of end up building this rhythm where you realize you just need to hit them with a 1, 2, 3 counter, guard break, 1, 2, 3, and you just kind of keep up that rhythm until they're dead. But I can't lie, because of the animations and the weapon types, the game was fun to do that. I am a sucker for hand-to-hand combat, as you can see with me talking about TV shows like Warrior and Gangs of London, which are heavy on martial arts action. I love just using my fists to just beat the absolute dog piss out of people. So you can bet the majority of my playthrough, I was using brass knuckles. And shout out specifically to those Cthulhu brass knuckles. I love me a good Lovecraftian flavor into my game. But I totally just had fun getting in street fights in Industrial Revolution London. Which reminds me, I love the fight clubs in this game. You can definitely tell they took inspiration from that scene in Sherlock Holmes where he's fighting in a big fight club, but I never got tired just throwing hands with dudes in a big pit. And again, I have to say, the animations carry it in a lot of ways because you have these awesome bone-crunching, face-splitting punches that just look and feel awesome. I always felt like a badass, and I think that's just a big compliment that I can always give to these games that they nail. Animations make you feel cool as fuck. I will say, I was pleasantly surprised by how useful the gun was in this game. I didn't love how the gun felt in Unity, but this one has a really satisfying crack as you're shooting people. And I will say, this game does still have the smoke bomb cheese, where if you get in a fight with a bunch of people, just throw down a smoke bomb and start thrashing dudes. But I never really found myself using that because I had so much fun just beating the dog piss out of people. And look, I'm not even just talking about using brass knuckles. I had just as much fun, surprisingly enough, using the kukri and the cane. In a game series where you're so used to using swords, it was a nice change up to do something that wasn't quite so militant, I guess you could say. It just really captures that street fighting vibe, and that's different for Assassin's Creed. And I also have to say, I absolutely love the stealth in this game. I actually think it may be a little more fun than Unity's. And like I said, I think a lot of that is because it's streamlined. I will say, I don't like that they got rid of the cover system and it kind of automatically locks you onto something if you're crouched and moving by it, because more than once that kind of got me in a little bit of trouble where I was trying to move, but it just hitched me to cover just a second too long to where somebody spotted me. But the enemy AI is really kind of dumb and forgiving in a good way that I always just felt like I was having fun sneaking around and just picking people off. It really doesn't put up that much of a challenge, but it didn't feel like that was a bad thing. And yes, I know a common complaint is that the throwing knives are overpowered, and I agree, they are overpowered, but it didn't really bother me. I felt like in this game that is just more about fun than anything else, I want to be an overpowered assassin. I want to be able to easily throw a knife and hit somebody in the head. And again, it just doesn't push back super hard, which I found to be kind of fun. It made me feel like a powerful assassin, being able to slink around people and pick them off silently without any of their buddies knowing. Oh, parkour. It's a weird thing to talk about with this game. Because yes, they do kind of use the bones of Unity, but again, it's streamlined in a way to make it easier, it provides less control, but it's a little more straightforward. And of course, the controversial introduction of the grappling hook. And here's what I'll say about the grappling hook. It completely trivializes parkour. It makes me not even have to think about it, which objectively, I would say is a problem. One of the staples of this series is parkour and being able to run around a city and climb around. And the majority of the time in this game, you're not climbing, you're using the grappling hook. But I could see the reason they made that decision is because they wanted to make huge buildings. For instance, Big Ben. Big Ben is humongous, and if you were to actually climb up it, it would take so long that it became tedious and boring. So the grappling hook and zipline are an easy way for them to try to get around that problem, so that they can continue to make big lifelike buildings. Now that doesn't mean that I was never using parkour. A lot of times in missions in confined areas, that's when I would kind of climb around buildings, sneak through windows and things like that. So you're still using it, you're not only using the zipline 100% of the time, but I was very rarely running around the city using parkour. I was most of the time just running across a building top, ziplining across the street. Oh, and that also explains the reasoning for the grappling hook, is the way the city is designed, the streets are super wide because of the introduction of the carriage. The carriage is kind of like their new driving mechanic, and it doesn't feel super realistic in a good way. Again, it feels arcadey and fun. It kind of reminded me a lot of the driving of Sleeping Dogs, where it had just enough weight that you like how it feels as you turn a corner, but not so weighty that you feel like you're sliding over the place. I mean, you can literally bash left and right, which isn't realistic, but it is fun. And I feel like that was the main emphasis of this game again. Let's focus on what is fun, and if it's not fun, let's change it to make it fun. Sorry, I just used the word fun a lot, but what can I say? This game is fun. I will say something that I did miss that they had a lot in Unity were interior environments that were kind of more detailed. So as you're running across the city, you can jump from one building top through a window and then go out the backside. That was something that was always cool, and they still have the occasional interior environment that I was able to jump through, but it's toned down so much more in this game, which it makes sense because they put such more of an emphasis on the grappling hook and the driving. But again, parkour, kind of a negative, but I can't lie, I had fun using the zipline. It became kind of brain dead after a while, but it was always good enough. And I think that's kind of the point here. It's good enough, it gets the job done, but it does kind of sacrifice something that made the series special. And going on to talk about the City of London, this is one of Ubisoft's more streamlined and fun maps that I think they made. Each of the boroughs feel distinct, and you have more poor districts with nicer districts, but all of them have a lot of the same activities such as gang hideouts, Templar targets, bounties to kidnap. All of these things were a ton of fun. Honestly, this is prime Ubisoft, and the concept behind it all is you're building up your street gang, which is cool as shit. Like I said earlier, I'm a sucker for this as a concept, and I think that is, in a lot of ways, the reason I like this game so much. And they do that idea really well, in my opinion. For example, here's the loop. You go into a region, you start taking over territory activity by activity to initiate a gang war with a cool or sometimes interesting gang leader. And it culminates with this huge street fight for control over the area. And it was always cool, and I always enjoyed doing it. I never got bored throughout my entire playthrough. And also, the gang economy and how you upgrade your gang is really fun and actually useful, from doing things like doling the rival gang's blades, or increasing the level of your own gang, or increasing the amount of hanging objects around the city for stealth approaches. Again, this fantasy of creating your gang, they just were able to really capture in a cool and interesting way that was just fun to play. I will say, once again, they bring back the staple of here's a bunch of collectibles, and once you get them all, you get a piece of armor. And I thought the Aegis was ugly as shit this game. I didn't like it at all, and it has this weird shimmering effect because it's Isu tech, and I just always thought it was ugly. I put it on once, hated how it looked, and didn't wear it for the rest of the game. Now, I will say when it comes to story missions, I wish there were more of them. I wish the Templar targets were maybe tied a little better to the gang leaders, so that way with each target you went after, it was more fun to conquer the area, and it almost more cultivated in the assassination of the Templar target instead of the gang war. And the only time I felt like they really went out of their way to do something interesting was with the fantastic Maxwell Roth, who is the overall leader of the Blighters. And this dude has tons of Joker energy, I'm just gonna be honest. That's probably a huge reason why I love him as a Batman fan, but I can't help it. I thought he was charismatic in his own weird, crazy way. And it's a shame because I felt like we didn't get enough time with him. And of course, they brought back the black box missions for this game. And again, they feel more streamlined. Granted, I talked about how in the previous game in Unity, they weren't quite as open as they make it seem. This game very much feels like, hey, the target's here, either unlock this unique way to assassinate him or just run right in and stab him. But of course, because I'm a completionist, I always found it more way to try to figure out how to get the unique assassination. And most of the time it pays off because you get a cool little moment. But when I'm looking back at all the story missions, while I find them equally as unmemorable as Unity was, I honestly thought this game was more fun. I had more fun playing the game, conquering areas, and taking out the targets, even if they weren't the most memorable. To talk a little more about the City of London, I thought the art style was pretty cool. I talked earlier about how I really love the Industrial Revolution setting. I just think visually it's interesting. I like the crude ironwork, the big smokestacks. Oh, and I love the River Thames. I think that's cool that it's its own little area as you're running across the river. And I cannot talk about how often I was doing boat raids just because I thought it was a cool and fun idea. And I love sneaking around the boat, snapping people, marking the containers and things like that. But overall, the city very much does just feel like a video game city. It's not super interactive, it doesn't feel super alive, and it doesn't even feel like by design you're supposed to look really closely at it. It very much just exists for you to run around and to kind of be a playground, not something to be lived in. Which is okay, it got the job done, it just didn't do anything spectacular. Now, spoilers, I feel the same way about the story I do the rest of the game. It wasn't particularly memorable, but again, I was never bored. Jacob and Evie are characters that are fun enough. I enjoyed my time with them. They don't do anything that leaves a lasting impact on me. They certainly aren't Ezio, Connor, or Bayek of Siwa, Edward Kenway, any of those that I really love. But I mean, damn, I enjoyed their sibling rivalry. I love seeing Jacob excited about building the rooks. I enjoyed seeing Evie struggling with whether she should or should not pursue a relationship with Henry. They capture a fun vibe similar to like a Guy Ritchie movie, and I mean, what can I say? I love them. And I know there are complaints about Jacob being a dumb character and completely compromising the tenets of the Creed, and my rebuttal to that is, duh, that's the point of his character arc. He's not somebody who's super loyal to the Creed. This is just what he was raised in and knows it feels like the right thing to do to bring freedom and liberty to people. He just isn't good at making the plans of what to do after the fact. Evie's arc is a lot more subtle, but equally as entertaining to go through. And that could also be just because I played often a lot more as Jacob, because it made more sense if I'm completing all of these gang activities. Why would I be doing that as Evie when she's not as invested story-wise? And I talked earlier about how I wish I had more time to spend with all the Templar targets, and honestly it's because none of them are super memorable. There's a couple that are kind of cool, like Maxwell Roth, and Joseph Starrick is honestly the second worst enemy after the Unities, who I can't even remember his name at all. He's just a bad guy and he wants control of the city, and that's cool, that's fine. He doesn't have to be any more deep than that, but it's a shame that he isn't somebody that I remember that well. I just remember his cool purple scarf, and that's about it. I just wish maybe they would have went a tad bit deeper on why he wants control of the city. Give him a little bit of incentive, a tiny bit of a motivation. I will say some of the side characters are a lot of fun. I love that Charles, Dickon, and Darwin are basically just cartoon character versions of themselves. It made all of their missions more fun, and I always had a smile on my face as I was doing things like investigating a haunted house with Charles Dickens, or chasing Spring Hill Jack around the city. And again, to wrap up my thoughts on the story, it wasn't incredibly memorable, but damn, it's fun, and I can't lie about that. Oh, I will say, the sneaky little added bit of a World War II game is fucking sick. I completely forgot about this, it's completely unexpected, and it's one of the coolest things about this game. They completely just fit this entire idea in there that you can wrap up in like an hour and a half. I will say, they also used this section to go back to their entire subplot with Juno, and that was always kind of meant to be the new modern day story, but Ubisoft obviously didn't give a shit about that because they ended it in a comic book. So if they didn't give a shit about it, I'm not going to give a shit about that story either. I'm just going to think it's cool that I got to run around in World War II London working with Winston Churchill as Jacob's granddaughter. And I want to talk about the Jack the Ripper DLC for a bit. This DLC is fucking cool. It has a much darker, creepy tone as it jumps 20 years forward. London itself is darker, there's more smog, there's more snow, it's way more bloody, and that makes sense with Jack the Ripper being a serial killer that you're hunting down. I don't want to give too many details about the story because I do think it's a cool idea, and if you haven't played it, you definitely should. They also did a couple of interesting things with the gameplay, like adding the fear system and stuff like that, and the one spoiler I will give, the sections where you play as Jack the Ripper are sick as the UI changes because you're playing as this dude who's psychotic. I would love to see other DLCs take bigger swings like this just to kind of do something different and cool. To wrap up my thoughts, I think Assassin's Creed Syndicate is a really fun game. Objectively, it doesn't do anything above the level of good. And honestly, that's okay. I think my personal taste and the things that I appreciate and like just stylistically carry this game a lot. And if you don't like the setting, or if you don't like the concept of building up your gang, this probably isn't something that's for you. And that's okay too. Any criticisms about this game being unmemorable, I kind of understand. But the one thing I could never agree with is that this game isn't fun as hell. Honestly, I probably shouldn't like this game as much as I do, but every time I picked up the controller and got my fingers on the sticks, I was smiling, having a good time, just throwing hands with people in the streets of London. This game gets a big thumbs up for me. It's something you should try, and I honestly think it's pretty underrated. But that's just my thoughts. I'm curious to what you guys think about Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Is it a game you think is underrated? Did you have a lot of fun with it? Did you bounce off of it? Give me your full thoughts in the comments below. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.